Well, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about service. And I'm very excited about this because service and helping other people has been a theme that's run through quite a few of the talks we've done already. We've talked about how focusing on others and helping others can help combat loneliness and anxiety. So now we're going to focus on service directly. And I want to start with a quote from a book that I thought was fantastic, and I can't remember the title of it now, but the quote says this: "This is what we're all dying for. Something that demands we step up and become better, more focused people. Something that calls out to the greatness that we hope is somewhere inside of us." And I love that quote because I think that's very true. And I think all of us can relate to that. I think all of us do hope there's greatness inside of us, and we yearn for something to call out and bring that out. And I really do believe there is greatness inside of us. I think God built us intentionally. I think the entire universe wasn't finished, in God's opinion, until you and I were in it. I think God gives us purpose. And I think helping other people helps shine a light on that purpose. One of the best examples of this that I have comes from my niece, Helen, who is absolutely adorable, and I love her to pieces. And when she was about 8, I went to visit them one time, and whenever I visit, Helen wants to spend every minute with me because I'm an uncle and I spoil her because we play games and I give her candy. And if anything gets difficult, then I can give her back to, her mother, my sister, but I get to do all the fun bits. Uncling is smart parenting. And so Helen loves when I'm around, but even when I'm visiting, sometimes I'll still have work to do. And so on this particular day, we'd done a bunch of fun things, but eventually I said, "Helen, I have to do some work now, so I'm going to sit in the kitchen, work on my laptop, and you go play in the living room." And she looked up at me with adorable eyes and said, "But Uncle, I don't want to be away from you." And that's really hard to say no to. But I said, "No, Helen, I have to work." So she did. She ran off and she sat on the couch in the living room where she could see me. And I started typing at my laptop. And I would look up and she'd be sitting on the couch and she'd look at me and say, "I miss you, Uncle." And I would say, "Oh my gosh, I miss you too." Ugh. And so I tried to type a little bit more and I looked up. And amazingly, in just about the 15 seconds that I had been typing, Helen had sneakily moved about 6 feet closer. She was now standing in the middle of the living room looking at me, adorable still, and looked at me and said, "I miss you, Uncle." I said, I know, Helen, I gotta keep working, but I'm gonna work fast." And I typed a little more, and I looked up again, and she was 6 feet closer. Terrifyingly stealthy. It would have been creepy if it wasn't so adorable. I smiled at her. She said, "I still miss you." And I typed a little bit more, and I looked up, and she was right behind my laptop, standing right there. And I looked at her, and she said, "Uncle, I don't want to be away from you." And I can't give in to that, except that I can and did. So I picked Helen up and I put her on my lap. Little 8-year-old Helen on my lap, trying to type around her. I've got her face, her hair in my face. I'm trying to stretch. And she thought my work was just pressing buttons on the laptop. So after just a few sentences, she thought that if she helped push the buttons, they would get pushed faster, I would be done working sooner, and we could play sooner. And so in the middle of an email, she started plonking down keys and somehow managed to press send. Some poor person got an email that said, "Thank you so much for your interest in booking Christopher Shaughnessy to speak. I think a good topic would be," which is really hard to explain, especially since I'm supposed to be a speaker. I'm supposed to know about words. After this, I had to take Helen down and said, "Helen, I love you, but I have to have you wait in the living room because this is really important and I can't have it messed up by accident." I think that's a great illustration of something that we a lot of times project onto God. A lot of times I think we think God has such a huge job. He's running the universe after all. I mean, goodness knows he has to spend a lot of time just on my needs. Imagine everyone else's too. That's a big job. And we project that onto God and think, "Oh my word, we mustn't get in the way and mess that up." And I don't think it's like that at all. I think it's the exact opposite of how I felt about Helen. Loved her dearly, but needed her to step away so I could do important work. God has demonstrated through sending his son to earth, through giving us purpose, through many, many stories in the Bible, that we were built for purpose. I think God doesn't say, "Go wait over there. I don't want you messing creation up." I think God says to us, "No, come with me, walk with me, talk with me. We're going to do this together." I've said it many times, but I believe that God refuses to give up on his dream for creation. And I think he invites us to be part of that. He doesn't just sit us away at a distance and say, "Don't mess this up." He says, "Come with me. Let's do it together." That, I think, is a beautiful calling. That is a beautiful example of purpose. I want to read to you a story from the Bible that I think emphasizes this really, really well, and I think has a call to us as far as what we're supposed to do. Because amidst everything that's going on, we've talked about, again, the benefits of helping others, but I really do believe it's going to be all the more important. We're constantly seeing examples of a hurt and broken world. Now more than ever, it's come into sharp focus. Between the pandemic, between riots and racism and climate change and a million other things that we talk about and can easily be overwhelmed by, I genuinely believe God A, knows about it, B, refuses to give up or be overwhelmed by it, and C, calls us to be a part of the solution. That should be inspiring. I think it'd be very easy to look at that and be overwhelmed. It'd be very easy to look at that and go, yeah, but what am I supposed to do? It's so big. That's why I think this story is important. So I want to read to you from the book of Mark. This is one of Jesus' miracles that he performed. It's pretty well known. It's the feeding of the 5,000. And I'm going to read through it and give a little commentary as well. So here we go. Mark chapter 6, beginning at verse 30. It says, the apostles, so Jesus' close followers, the apostles then met with Jesus and they reported on all that they had done and taught. So these apostles had been out. Jesus had sent them into the surrounding towns and villages to teach, to perform miracles, to heal people, to do great things. So they came back. They were excited about all they'd done. And Jesus said to them, come off by yourselves. Let's take a break and get a little rest. Even Jesus realized sometimes you've got to sit back and rest. You've got to reflect a little bit. For there was constant coming and going. They were busy. They didn't even have time to eat. So they got into a boat and they went off to a remote place by themselves. But someone saw them going and word got around. From the surrounding towns, people went out on foot, running, and got ahead of them. When Jesus arrived, he saw this huge crowd. Now, this next part I think is important, because if it were me and I had been doing a whole bunch of stuff and just wanted to get away, and I thought I was going to a solitary place, if when I got there were crowds of people, I would have been angry or disappointed or gone, oh, for goodness sakes, I just want to break. But listen to what Jesus does. When Jesus arrived, they saw the huge crowd, but at the sight of them, his heart broke. Like sheep with no shepherd they were. He went right to work teaching them. When his disciples thought that this has gone on long enough, they were tired and hungry. So I imagine they were like, Jesus, oh my gosh, we just want a break. Stop being so great. When the disciples thought this has gone on long enough, it was now quite late in the day, they interrupted. So Jesus is there teaching and they're like, excuse us, Jesus, it's just that we're tired. That's kind of what happened. We're a long way out in the country, they said, and it's very, very late. Say a prayer and wish everyone well, and then send these folks off so that they can get some supper, which I think was kind of sneaky. The disciples were hungry. That was basically a whiny way of saying, just send them away because they're hungry. And Jesus actually responds to them. And he says, well, you do it. You fix them supper. Now that must have been a bizarre thing to hear because there's 5,000 people in this crowd. And he's telling a close-knit group of disciples, just a handful of people, will you feed them? And they replied, are you serious? You want us to go spend a fortune on food for their supper? But he was quite serious. I think that they were actually responding quite sarcastically to them. I think that we sometimes assume in the Bible everyone just speaks eloquently all the time. We said, are you serious, Jesus? You want us to go spend a fortune? No, I think they were like, really, Jesus? Really? There's 5,000 of them? Sure. Let me just dig in my pocket and pull out a small fortune. Oh, wait, I have no money. I think they were being sarcastic. But Jesus was quite serious. So he asked them, how many loaves of bread do you have? Take an inventory. That didn't take long, and they answered, 5. And then I think they're sarcastic again, because again, 5,000 people, and Jesus is like, well, you feed them. How much bread have you got? And they're like, how much bread? For 5,000? Yeah, let me just see. Oh, wait, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. I can count it on one hand, Jesus, 5. And then they get sarcastic and they're like, oh, but also 2 fish. So everything's going to be fine, because 5 loaves wouldn't have fed 5,000. But don't worry, we've also got 2 fish, so everything's fine. I really think this is a sarcastic response. Jesus got all of the people in the crowd to sit down in groups of 50 or 100. They looked like a patchwork quilt of wildflowers spread out on the green grass. He took the 5 loaves and 2 fish. He lifted his face to heaven in prayer, blessed, broke, and gave the bread to the disciples. And the disciples in turn gave it to the people. He did the same with the fish, and they all ate their fill. The disciples gathered 12 baskets of leftovers. More than 5,000 people were at the supper. This, I think, is an amazing story for all kinds of reasons. First of all, it's miraculous, but one of the miracles in there was even though they got sarcastic, the disciples were faithful It actually would be a very scary thing to only have a little bit of food and be sent out into a giant crowd of hungry people. They could have mobbed the disciples. They could have fought over that small amount of food. That actually would be a very scary situation to be in. But they trusted Jesus and they did it. And miraculously, Jesus gave them everything they needed to accomplish what he asked of them. That is the takeaway here. I feel like a lot of us, me included, often respond to God or even other taskings kind of like the disciples. We look at everything going on and we're like, really? You want me to fix it? Sure, let me get right on that because I'm so powerful. Oh, wait, I'm not. And yet, Jesus doesn't call us into purpose without equipping us. I believe that he's given us creativity. I believe that he will show us ways that we are meant to love one another, ways that we are going to make differences much bigger than we even think. But I think it takes the faith of the disciples. We have to be willing to go where God calls us, even if it looks like it's beyond hope. God is never beyond hope. One last story that I want to share with you that I love sharing with fellow third culture kids, with basically people that I get to talk to all over the place, because I think it's a story that wraps up what I believe is true for all of you, for all of us, and what we get to do in the world. For the story to make sense, you need to realize I don't respond to heat very well at all. I overheat very quickly. I've told this story many times, and I constantly feel like I need to remind people this is not just a humble, oh, I get hot. I mean, I sweat a lot. I was not built for hot weather. When I sweat doesn't roll down, it sort of leaps off. It's a very three-dimensional sweat. So with that in mind, I was with a friend of mine named Walter. We were in Eastern Europe. We're actually looking for places to work on a humanitarian project, and we'd been exploring and searching. We were on our way home, and we needed to catch a train from Zagreb, Croatia to Budapest, Hungary. And we went by train because it was cheap, but it was a good 12-hour ride. And this was the height of summer. And it does get kind of hot in Croatia. And so we got to our train about midday. The station was so packed that the train was sitting outside of the platforms. Now, trains are just hollow metal tubes. When they're in the sun, they basically turn into little easy bake ovens. And so we opened the door to this train and a blast of hot air came out. It's actually where I lost my hair. It singed it all off. That's not entirely true. We boarded the train. And it was a very old-fashioned train. It was made up of little rooms with 3 seats facing 3 seats and just rows of rooms like that with a corridor that connected them all. So we found an empty room, we sat down, and I began to sweat. When I say sat down, I mean I was already so sweaty and the seats were kind of leathery that I slipped right off and then created a puddle of sweat. Walter got nervous and said, "Oh my gosh, you're going to drown us all in your sweat." And I said, "Walter, don't worry. I'm sure once the train gets moving, they'll turn the air conditioning on. It'll be fine." Finally, the train did start moving. No air conditioning came on. In fact, there was a vent, and something was coming out of it, but it was not cold air. What was coming out of the vent on the train was basically a which is warm and moist and horrible. It's the last thing you want when you're already overheating. So I began to panic. I was on a hot train, hot air was coming out of the vent, so I clamored to open the window. The window wouldn't open. It had been bolted shut. Someone had screwed bolts to make sure the window could not be opened. We moved to another compartment to check. It was the same way. The windows across the entire train had been bolted shut. They were trying to cook us, I was convinced. I began to panic and started getting irrational. I thought I have to claw my way through the metal in the sidecar to make a hole. And that doesn't actually work. And I thought, I'm going to go to the very back of the train and that giant door that says do not open. I'm going to open it because air needs to come in. And the vacuum from the train moving, the air will be sucked in. I don't know if that's really what happens, but I thought it was. Walter saw how panicky and nervous I was, and I began to march out toward the end of the train. Walter came after me a few minutes later. He said, "Don't panic, I've solved it." I said, "Walter, if you're lying to me, I will drown you in my own sweat," which is a threat no one should ever make. Walter said, No. I realized on my keychain, I have a key that's the exact same width as the bolts for the windows. I was able to unbolt the window and open it. I went back to our compartment, and sure enough, the window was open, a nice breeze was coming in. We were going to be fine. We were going to survive. We sat there. My sweat began to evaporate. I was able to actually sit on the leather chair without slipping off. And I reflected for a second. And I said, "Walter, you realize that every compartment we went into was boiling hot with windows that were bolted shut?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Walter, that means everyone else on this train is suffering." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Walter, we have to do something." And Walter said, "What exactly are we going to do? You don't speak Hungarian or Croatian. You can't just go barging into people's rooms and hope that they let you in to unbolt their windows." And I said, "Walter, when you say it like that, it's like you know exactly what I'm going to do." Walter said he wouldn't come with me. It was crazy. So I took Walter's keys and I moved to the very first room on the train. It was a sad sight inside. There were 6 people, all sort of melted into a human soup of sweat on the ground. And I flung the door open and I said, "Hello, I'm here to liberate you. I'm going to open your windows." And they said, "Ugh," because they were all melting. I moved through human slush and I unbolted the windows and I pulled it open and a breeze came in. The people revived and said, I have no idea what, because I don't speak Hungarian or Croatian. But it looked thankful. So I moved on to the next room and did the same thing, flung the door open, moved in, opened the windows, people revived and said, I don't know what. I got to about the 3rd or 4th room, flung the door open, and said, "I'm here to liberate you from the heat." And in this particular compartment were a bunch of French people. And they recognized that because part of the French motto is égalité, fraternité, liberté. And so when I said liberate, they said égalité, fraternité, liberté. So I moved through, I opened the windows, and they were so excited. And I speak a little French, badly. And when they revived, they said, "Oh, merci beaucoup, c'est trop chaud." I said, "Yes, you're welcome. It is too hot." I said, "Don't worry, I've ouvert your fenêtres," which is terrible French. And they were so excited. And I said, "Okay, bye." And I moved on. But they came with me. 6 French people just trailed behind me. I wasn't sure what to do with that. When I got to the next compartment, I flung the door open. And before I could say anything, 6 French people all yelled, "Liberté!" which terrified the people inside. And so I said, no, we're here to help. I'm going to ouvre your fenêtres. So I opened their windows. I moved on. The French people moved on. And weirdly, the 6 people from that compartment joined it and moved on as well. As we moved down the train, more and more people just kept joining. It got to the point that people thought they were being robbed because this giant mob was yelling. I would go by about the 15th room, open a door, and before I could say anything, 60 people would all scream, "Liberté!" And people would just hold up their wallets. And I would say, no, we're not here for your money. I'm going to over your, it's fine, just sit down. We made it through the entire train. We liberated everyone from the heat. Everyone was so excited. People were getting to know each other. And I suddenly panicked and thought, oh, I've lost Walter. I went back to our room and it was empty. And I did panic. Walters are very hard to replace. And then I saw his feet sticking out from under the chair. I lifted the chair up and Walter was there and said, "There is an angry mob, hide." I said, no, they're a happy mob. They're my mob and they're happy, it's fine. People had noticed I was gone. They came to find me. I introduced them to Walter. I said, "His keys opened the windows." And they said, "Viva Walter!" When we finally arrived in Budapest, all of these about 60 people didn't want to stop hanging out. We'd all liberated the train together and now we were bonding. And so everyone wanted to have dinner together. It was a beautiful thing. There were people in the crowd who didn't have a place to stay in the city, and other people from the train that they'd met let them stay with them. Some people had never been there before, and so other people were willing to show them around. It was such an incredibly beautiful thing. We started a Facebook group. There is now a Facebook group for the Great Croatian Train Liberation. We're still friends. A couple of years ago, I went to one of their weddings. I tell you this story because I think it's a fantastic illustration of what we're called to do. You, my dear friends, are called by God to do great things, to help other people. There's greatness inside of you that He calls out to. And I genuinely think as we come out of the pandemic, as we're facing all of the troubles and struggles that we are now, even little differences that we make in the lives of others can do a huge amount of work to make us better, more focused people, to build community, to reflect onto the world the love that God shows to us. I never would have dreamed that just by trying to help a few people on a train, I would have built up and been a part of this phenomenal community. You have no idea how powerful you are. Even small acts to help other people, the ability and discipline to think of the needs of others before your own, goes a long way to shine a light on that greatness that God definitely has built into you. The world is in desperate need of connected people who are willing to see the needs of others. And God's love extends to the entire world, I genuinely believe, through us. I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes, and it's a quote by, again, someone who I can't remember from a great book, but the quote says this: "Ultimately, our gift to the world around us is hope. And it's not a blind hope that pretends that everything is fine when clearly it's not, but it's the kind of hope that comes from staring pain and suffering right in the eyes and refuses to believe that's all there is." I believe that is our call from God to the world. There is pain and suffering all around us, but because God loves us and has put greatness inside of us that He calls out to, He wants us to love His creation, to be ambassadors for Him. I believe that we can stare that pain and suffering right in the eyes and refuse to believe that's all there is. So, my dear friends, go liberate trains, do great things, start small and help other people. You will be amazed at how much it turns into bigger things. The greatness inside of you is just waiting to come out. And putting other people first, even in little tiny ways, leads to bigger ways. And that is what God planned. He refuses to give up on his dream for creation. And we are a reminder to creation of that promise. So thanks so much for joining us. And now we can continue and have a little chat.